Okay. Okay. Well, thank you and welcome everyone to our first Cannabis Program Working Committee meeting. The December 9th, 2021 Cannabis Program Working Committee meeting of the City of Hawthorne is called to order. The time is 11:07 a.m. Will be led by the Pledge of Allegiance. If you will, please. Sergeant Craig, can you do us the honor, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you please stand up, face the flag. Go ahead. Pledge
Pledge allegiance
to the flag
by
to the United States of America,
America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Madam Chairperson Reyes, English.
Here.
Committee Member Norris.
Present.
Committee Member Kim.
Here.
Committee Member McLean.
Here.
And Committee Member Craig.
Here.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, please read the guidelines for oral communications, please.
Thank you. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54952.3, all remarks shall be addressed to the committee as a body and not to any individual member of the committee. During oral communication, speakers shall have 3 minutes to state their business. The Brown Act prohibits the committee members from providing a detailed response or acting upon any item not contained on the agenda. The committee as a body shall have the discretion at the close of oral communications to refer any remark to the City Clerk's Department for Study Investigation Report and or recommendations.
Let's see, are there any, City Clerk, any written communications that we received?
We have received no written communication at this time, and we've received no request for anyone to speak on the items contained in the agenda tonight.
Okay, thank you. If there are anyone, I should say, if there is anyone that would like to address these bodies, if there are any objections and there are no speakers at this time, I'll declare oral communications closed at this time. So ordered. Item number 3 is the selection of our vice chair. I'd like to open the floor for nominations, and a second would be needed to make the appointment by the committee members. Are there any nominations at this time from our board?
I'd like to nominate Kenny Craig.
I second that.
There's a motion and a second for Sergeant Craig. Anyone else? Seeing no one, can we please do a roll call, please, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Madam Chairperson Reyes English,
Yes.
Committee Member Norris,
Yes.
Committee Member Kim,
Yes.
Committee Member McLean,
Yes.
and Committee Member Craig. Did I hear Mr. Craig?
Committee Member Craig, was that a yes?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Seeing that the vote is 5-0, congratulations. You have been appointed to be the vice chair for the committee.
Congratulations, committee member and Sergeant Craig.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, we've done the roll call. We did the appointment. Now at this time, I'd like to ask committee member, it's not committee member, it's going to be, we have our first item, I should say, first item number 4 on the agenda is a presentation from our consultants proposed analysis by senior planner, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer, please proceed.
Thank you. If I could share my screen, I have a small little PowerPoint. Just give me a second.
Mr. Palmer, if you can introduce yourself and title, please.
Chris Palmer, Senior Planner, City of Hawthorne. And I'm not sure if you can see my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
And it shows the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay. So we're just here to talk about the scope, the cost, and the agreement, and what factors are going to contribute to that. So the city released the RFP for a scope and asked for all aspects of developing and implementing a cannabis program, inclusive of retail, cultivation, lounge, etc. EDGMA expresses their ability to complete this task. The RFP asks for a range of services fully inclusive of developing a program. Some of the departments are more suited than others to take on the tasks associated with the program development. Some of the departments, including planning, police, building, code enforcement. For example, police may be able to handle some of the background checks that are required, maybe some of the fingerprinting. Building may or may not be able to handle the inspections because of the existing workload and the number of inspectors we already have. And then planning we may not have enough staff to tackle the report or the ordinance development or the monitoring. So rather than parcel out the functions of the program, we should consider, is it best to have the policy managed wholly by EDGMA? And then we have the scope and the cost. So this is just kind of to show some of the costs associated with the development of the program. And this particular screen is showing the per applicant cost. So these costs that you see, $4,875, that's each. And then that describes the application intake, review, and the screening. So those are some of those costs that are associated with it. And then this screen kind of demonstrates the per hour basis of the cost. $225 to $250 per hour for the cannabis project management and so on. And so combining the entirety of this scope of work and imagining or envisioning EDGMA running the entire program, you're looking at an approximate cost of $411,000. And that's actually based on 20 to 25 applicants. And then the minimum cost the city's going to incur is basically $6,000 a month, the program management fee. And so, to help us kind of come up with this, we have to decide which departments can handle what, and, what is the goal? To have the cost program developed fully funded by the applicants? Are we looking at a $15,000 per applicant fee? Are we looking at a max number of applicants? Are we looking at a different number? So what we're not concerned with is the actual cost itself. EDGMA is very competitive with the amounts that they're representing. And I've taken a look at what other cities have paid, EDGMA, and what the other kind of consultants that we received information about. And so the cost is relative across the board. And so what we need is to have an understanding, set expectations, and help finalize this agreement and what departments are expected to contribute. And so that pretty much concludes my report. I am available if you have questions, but this is just to open up the discussion topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I'm going to ask my board if there's any comments, remarks, questions that they may have with regards to what we just saw. And I really wish we had maybe printed out that presentation and given it to our board members so they could physically had studied that a little bit more.
I'll email it to everyone right now.
Yeah, that would have been helpful. Some of the remarks that you made mention some of the remarks, Mr. Palmer, that you made mention was the application fee. And I know that there's a few members on the council that participated and visited a few businesses throughout LA County. And I know there was questions posed to those, and there was some that provided those costs per applicant, et cetera. I think 15,000 is a little high, but do you know what city has ever charged someone 15,000 for an applicant?
For this particular type of application, I've seen very expensive application fees.
Okay.
Mr. Palmer, could you share that screen again, please? That's being mentioned.
And if I may, Mr. Palmer, in terms of, you mentioned that all of these fees will be borne out by the application fee, correct? Except for that 6,000 something a month for that the city would be paying. 6,000 a month for monthly minimum program management fee. Is it based on the, does it matter? Because these rates are per hour. So is there a dependence on the number of applicants? So let's say if we only have for this program, only 5 applicants, then would the rates for the consultant costs be borne out by the city for larger amount?
Correct. So if we only have 5 applicants and let's say that costs $5,000, that's $25,000 and we still have $400,000 left of work. I mean, you know, that's going to be billable because it's the same amount of work. It's the more applicants we get, the better is the bottom line. Even though everyone won't be accepted, we need the number of applicants to be increased in order to have this cost recovery cover itself.
My question would be, if there's less applications, will the hours decrease? So I guess the consulting group can talk about that later, but my concern would be, with the amount of hours put into this task be lower due to the limited amount of applications?
I don't believe so, because there's still the development of the ordinances. There's still the research that needs to be done. There's a lot of program development that Edgemont would do. And you know, that's going to take hours and hours of work.
Thank you.
So let me, Mr. Palmer, let me go through each item. And again, these are the proposed fees that Ijama has provided us, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's go to the very beginning. And I think it's important that we take each line item to understand exactly the fee and what the detail of the work would entail. So let's go to the very first slide, the one that shows the very first one you had up. Yeah. So the cannabis project management, what is the definition of that? What exactly would they be under the project management at that hourly rate?
In just a second. So this phase will have to do with the permitting framework, including social equity program, project schedule, cannabis program development, consult with staff and the city to figure out what the preparation of the ordinance and everything will entail. What are we going to look, the cost recovery, proposed operation application, provide education and conduct community outreach, things like that.
Okay. And item number 2, general planning services.
That's going to be entitlements. So land use planning, land use entitlement, CEQA review, development agreements, public hearings, things of that nature.
And admin miscellaneous services.
That's likely going to be what Edgemont does for their side to maintain. I'm not sure of that one specifically.
So anything other work may be outside the scope?
Not necessarily outside scope, but kind of just to maintain the framework.
In the services.
Yes.
And the development of the agreement negotiation.
Right. So that's once we figure out the applicants and who we're going to actually go with, then it's the negotiation of just the development agreement.
With those that submit their applications for license.
Yes. The ones that that are actually successful in attaining the permit.
In getting to an ultimate decision, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And the 500 per hour site visit, what is that exactly?
So in case of inspections or to see if they could kind of even qualify to run a cannabis facility likely.
Inspections, assuming these are what? In advance, after? It's preempted, isn't it? To say 500 an hour to visit a site if it hasn't even been developed? Or is this after the fact?
I'm believing it's inclusive. There may be time to inspect ahead of time to see what sites or what zones we're going to even allow it in. And then once we start the permitting process, to go out and finalize the permit.
And then the monthly cost at 6,000 monthly would be the overall program management fee?
It's like a retainer fee.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's what I was gonna say too. That could be higher or lower.
So basically that is going to be 6,000, but if the billable hours exceed 6,000, they'll be charged at the hourly rate above that.
Okay, let's go to the next line item.
And so these are kind of, so I'll let you go ahead and take the lead.
So the application intake, review, and screening, this is per applicant, and this is, again, the consultant that's reviewing them. And they're charging the applicant or charging us at $4,875 each applicant.
This is the recovery cost is what it looks like. So basically, if you add these up, this kind of similar to what the cost of the application would be, if you ask me, but I want to get EJMA's take on this. And so, but some of the stuff like the public hearing, presentation and prep. So if there's a conditional use permit requirement and they file for that and we need EJMA to come and do the work of the public hearing, it's going to cost $7,950 per public hearing and presentation.
Okay,
And so that these numbers here to me help frame the cost of the application. And so
from what, just to make some, clearer understanding, the $4,875 each, it's the application intake, review, and screening. This is what they're charging each applicant. And this is the fee of, because this again is the consultant's fees analysis. Right?
Yeah.
So this is their fee to process these applicants.
right,
Not the city's fee.
right.
Okay, for the 500 each is the live scan background. Who runs those live scans?
This is all through EJMA.
Okay, so they're gonna run, and it's gonna be 500 each that they're gonna be charging applicant.
Yes.
So the zoning and the sensitive use verification, what exactly is the 800 each? What is this item?
Oh, I'm not sure the detail of that.
Okay, I'll maybe ask some more as we go on into the presentation. I have concerns and questions with regards to zoning, building inspections. I have concerns with regards having to do anything where ultimately the city council would make the final decision. So to move along in this process, I want to be able to ask further questions, and I definitely need this printed out. So can someone print it for me and bring this to me? And then I'll go ahead and proceed with our next item. Is there anyone else?
So if I can make a suggestion, Chris, can you email us this items that you have on the screen to each member? And then we can also use that when EJMA does their presentation, so we could ask more detailed questions about each of these items when they do their presentation.
It looks like they're going to be next.
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Palmer, would you please also facilitate a copy to the clerk's office? Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll be doing that right now. So I'm gonna stop sharing and leave the meeting for a second.
Okay, so for the most part, Mr. Palmer, everything that you've provided here is, again, just a review of the applicant's, not the applicant, the consultant's proposal, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
May I ask a question?
One last question, I'm sorry, is that, Mr. Palmer, in terms of the fees for EJMA, it's in line with the other proposals that the city received from other consultants on the
Correct.
RFP process. Okay, thank you.
We don't believe they're overpriced at all.
Yeah, Mr. Palmer, real quick, I just want to, the first slide, you were showing like the program management and those things. So if I'm to understand correctly, whether we have 1 or 100 applications, those fees are going to be the same, right? That's
Correct.
what has to be done no matter what. You mentioned earlier, I'm trying to figure out, where do we pick up an economies of scale of having more applicants? Where would that show itself? Does that make sense?
So if it costs $10,000 for someone to apply, and we have 25 applicants, that's $250,000. And then if the overall cost is approximately $411,000, it'll cut into the total cost.
Oh, okay, I understand. So that's not the cost of the city. That's the cost that the applicant's going to be paying. So the more applicant, the more fees we recover in application fees, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any more questions? Okay, so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and go on to item number 5, and that's going to be the presentation by JAMA Consultants.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Ebony J. McGee Anderson, and I am the Director of EJMA Planning and Development. We did provide a full proposal, and I'm not sure if all of you received all of that, so we can maybe send out an email link after this so that you can have the full proposal in front of you. There were a few things that we wanted to accomplish with this meeting, and one of them was narrowing down the scope. Initially, the RFP was for an open scope of services, so we provided an outline of all of the potential services that we would think that you would need for your city and your program and what was expressed during the hearings. On the 7th, the City Council determined that they wanted to entertain all of the major cannabis uses, which include cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and retail. So I think you all had it itemized as transportation, but it would technically be distribution with transportation, which is a form of distribution without any actual ownership of the product. So we have a transport only license, and then we have a full distribution license. So there are a variety of licenses we need to narrow down in order for us to really narrow down the scope. What we provided was a scope based on all of those uses. And we used about 20 as the application number, assuming that you would get approximately 20 applications. But even using that formula, we first have to look at what uses we're going to allow. So if we're going to allow all of those uses, the first question for the committee is, do you want them to, each of those uses to have a separate licensing fee or activity fee? Or would you like one comprehensive fee that would allow applicants to select multiple licenses? Because in cannabis, generally, applicants will want to have an integrated license, which means that they'll have multiple license activities under one company umbrella. So for example, you might want cultivation and manufacturing. You might want distribution and delivery. So the question would be before the committee is, would you like to take those as individual applications or individual activities that you make a decision on? Or would you like applicants to have the freedom of choosing one or up to all 5 for the same application fee? So that is the first question. I think before we can answer some of those other ones about how the numbers add up, I think we need to start there to first tackle that, because that will impact how the scope will be written, and also those fees. And a lot of the later fee questions I can get into, but I think it's important that we start there so that the formula will add up.
Questions?
If I may, through the chair, can you go over some of the benefits and the disadvantages to the city of choosing those options of all-inclusive or separate applications?
Sure. If we did an application process where we allowed operators to fully integrate, meaning they had the option to select one or more activities, and we can pretty much look at those individually without having to have a separate application, if you will, because a lot of them are happening in the same building, in the same facility. So on one hand, you'll have the opportunity to look at the project in its entirety, full scope. But some cities are using their cannabis program to drive some type of revenue. So if that's the case, then you would want to make sure that you have a separate application fee for each use. Most cities do it that way. Most cities have a fee per use. I have seen it also where there's a complete application fee, like just to apply, there's a fee, and then a smaller fee per activity. That's another way to do it. But ultimately, the time and cost recovery for reviewing such application will be relatively the same, whether you're allowing one use or all of them, at least initially. On the back end, when we're looking at the compatibility issues, when we're looking at operational requirements, those are going to be different. But when we're initially just doing the screening of applicants, that work isn't going to be drastically different. So it really is a city call as to how affordable you want to make this application.
So if the city wanted to keep all its options open, in other words, city may eventually want to allow one operator to have all the license because I mean that would require a pretty big facility, correct?
Not necessarily. If you had a I guess relative, operating, but we have a license called a micro business, and that micro business under the state requirements, you only have to have 3 of the uses, which could be a small cultivation site, a small manufacturing site, and maybe retail or some combination. So you can have a footprint of 10,000 square feet or less and still be able to do these activities. But a lot of cities do require that, and even the state, they mirror the state. So under the state, you have a separate application for each and every activity, including a micro business, which the micro business is its own separate license. So my recommendation is always following the state model because that's what everyone is most familiar with. But there are opportunities for you to combine them.
Yes, but if we kept that separate for each use application, then the city would retain the option of even allowing someone to have all 4 licenses, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I am leaning towards after obviously Tuesday's council meeting and the selection from all the council members on how much and what types of licensing. And yes, absolutely correct with regards to the distribution, transportation. I don't know if you know this, Ebony, but back in 2017, we had permitted for pass-through for delivery. So that's on the books. However, distribution, we might need to change the language just to assure that that's exactly what we mean, because I think the pass-through distribution was for medical use and to assure that it's getting to its patients, right?
Right. So I think there's 2 things that, or 2 uses that often get interchanged, delivery and distribution, and those are separate. So retail has non-storefront retail, which is delivery, and it also has storefront retail, which is like a brick and mortar store or dispensary, as we previously called them.
Right.
And then distribution is wholesale distribution. So when we're saying distribution, it means from it's licensee to licensee. So not necessarily delivering products to individuals in the city, but other businesses. So business to business.
So Greg, just to make sure I'm on the right path here. Tuesday's selection by the council was for retail, cultivation, manufacturing, and in this instance, the distribution, which is the transportation component, correct? That's 4. I have seen from my reviews of other cities, separate applications and separate licensing. And I think that works best because what's important here too is to assure that the applicants that are applying is the word I want to use, and I can't find it right now, merit-based. And that's important because once we do merit-based, we understand that they're either already in the business, are already knowledgeable with regards to what that entails, each of those product that I just made mention, what that entails, and what those potential costs and fees and processes are. So I want to hear from the board with regards to my I'm not going to say recommendation quite yet because I want to hear feedback from the board, but my remarks. Separate applications for each item that the council has decided to go with. And if we need to make some language changes to assure that the distribution, transportation, however you want to call it, delivery is language that means all of that. So if I could hear from the board.
What I have question about is, and Ebony, isn't delivery is where a someone with a license delivers the product to a customer, which I don't think was one of the contemplated licenses that City Council had voted on.
So that falls under retail. So there's just so I usually have a slide on this, but there's under retail license, there's two types, storefront and non-storefront. Under cultivation, there's a variety of types at the state level. At the city level, some cities mirror the state in their ordinance and others just call it cultivation. And it really doesn't matter so much at the city level because there's one fee. At the state level, there's several fees based on the size of your operation. So we have retail with two components, non-storefront and storefront. We have manufacturing that has two different licenses or sub-licenses, which is volatile and non-volatile, type 6 or 7 at the state, which basically means solvent extraction or solventless, more or less. So if you're using any kind of heavy solvents to do extraction, butane, propane, any of those are type 7 manufacturing. And then we have type 6 manufacturing. Sometimes you'll hear it be called light manufacturing. That isn't that heavy manufacturing process. It's more like a solventless manufacturing, or they use a water extraction process, something that doesn't have a hazardous material. So those are the two types of manufacturing options you have, and you can limit either of those. And then you also have your variety of cultivation. And so when you were thinking about retail, I'm not sure how the council envisioned it, but at the state level, if you have a brick and mortar or storefront retail license, you are allowed to do delivery underneath it. So either way, you're going to have delivery.
So I just want to make sure that the council has full options. So even though you may have subparts to these licenses, I just want to make sure that the city and the city council has options of all of those. So the 4 categories that was approved by council at the last meeting was retail, cultivation, manufacturing, and transportation. And I just want to make sure, would that cover it? I understand they could have subparts, but would that cover all the licenses in general?
That would cover all of them except for testing.
Okay.
So there is a testing license that was missing from the list. That obviously testing is one that is probably the least controversial. Most cities allow testing pretty easily. However, we have the least amount of testing facilities and the least amount of testing licenses because they are quite difficult to get. There's a lot of accreditations you have to have a testing license, and a whole lab and a lab staff. So if the city hasn't anticipated going through that testing license process, that is something that you may want to think about, because I do believe your city would benefit from having a testing license. And there aren't a lot of cities that have testing licenses, or a large number of them. So it is a really great license to have in the city.
I'm sorry, just to follow up, it doesn't, when you say testing, if you have a fully licensed facility, including manufacturing, isn't there an agency with the state that comes and tests your product?
No, it's you have to have a testing. It's another license type in cannabis. It's testing. You have to be accredited, and you have to go through the same licensing process as any other cannabis business at the state, but they do have specific requirements for testing facilities and accreditations for testing facilities. But it is a third-party independent licensee that conducts cannabis license testing. It is still regulated by the state, just like all cannabis businesses, but it is a third-party business.
Go ahead, Vaughn, your hand's up.
Okay, yes, it is. Hi, Ebony. A question for you. You spoke about sub-licenses. As far as under one license, you'll be able to actually participate in other type of business opportunities. Have you, in your experience, has cities charged for those licenses under that umbrella?
Typically not, and most cities, if they do allow, they'll usually say, we allow manufacturing, and then let the business make it a business decision as to whether you're doing type 7 or type 6, because at the state level, you'll have to apply for that. So ultimately what the cities typically do are create umbrella licenses or authorizations. So you can do cultivation, but you still have to get a specific cultivation license based on your business model at the state. So generally what we're doing at the local level is saying, can you do this or not? Are you allowed to do cultivation? If so, go to the state, get the license based on your footprint. If you're going to allow manufacturing, you say, we allow manufacturing, go to the state and get your appropriate license. Now, I will caution you, type 7 manufacturing, volatile manufacturing is very difficult for an operator to get in the city or in the county of Los Angeles if you're going through LA County Fire. The process is so rigorous. So it is a very, it can be a very dangerous activity, which is why we want to push for licensing, because if we don't have licensing available for this, folks are doing it, you know, in the closet and blowing things up. So we want to make sure that we have the fire department on this. We want to make sure that we have code enforcement watching these operators do this heavy manufacturing process. So it's really, really important. And the LA County Fire has done an excellent job screening these applications and making sure they're meeting all of the fire regulations and safety regulations to make sure we have safe manufactured products, which is really important. But there are cities that, like Los Angeles, that said, we're going to hold off, we'll allow it at some point, but right now we're only going to authorize type 6, which is non-volatile manufacturing, until our fire department can create the regulations necessary to go through this process. So that's the only license type with a subcategory that I would caution you about, because it is a very, very it's a very long process, and it also requires a lot of department review from outside agencies like the fire department, which is really important.
Mr. Palmer?
Yeah, so does this licensing include lounge? Does
This, what the city council put forward on the 7th, does not include any consumption lounges. We didn't talk about the social equity component of this, which I think it's important for this committee to address and hear. But the on-site consumption lounge issue is not one at the state level. That is simply a local jurisdiction issue. And so that would be something that we would put in our ordinance, whether or not we would allow on-site consumption. And if so, is that authorization license from the city? And what does that look like? Does it look something close to a cigar lounge? Is it something like West Hollywood, where it's edibles only, no smoke? Those are things that we can address with our cannabis ordinance and our cannabis program, but it isn't something that requires a state license.
So I want to go back to some of the other choices, licensing choices that the council did not entertain, that I ultimately would like to probably bring back to the council for consideration.
Sure.
One of them is the testing component. The testing component is very important. For one, there aren't very many. For two, it's a service that's needed, and it's a service that would ultimately be utilized. And considering the South Bay region that we're in, we don't have that. A lot of them are in Los Angeles and are working outside of, maybe I would say in LA County, but the vicinity. And so when I talk about, a cannabis program in the city of Hawthorne, I want to assure that we also have a testing component to it. It's important to assure that product is a good product. It's important to know that it's being regulated by the state. And it's important to know that ultimately some of these businesses that would be applying could have the luxury of a testing site here in Hawthorne. So that's important. Some of the other things that we are now discussing are, you know, lounges and things like this. And I have visited the city of West Hollywood, and I did participate in a couple of locations already, if not in the process of making them lounges. There were some concerns for me, in my opinion, that, you know, some are a good fit in other cities and some are not. It's almost like, you know, my passion is not your passion, but at the same time, we could come to a mutual respect and understanding. That brought a red flag concern. And I think that's probably another concern that most of the council members had, and that was not part of the Tuesday's decision-making part of that list. But I do want to ultimately bring back a testing component. Now, whether or not these applicants are successful in getting their license through other agencies other than the city of Hawthorne, such as LA Fire and other resources that these facilities will ultimately need, right? I don't think that's either here or there with regards to, you know, what it is that they would have to do, right? Because they're the business that is ultimately looking for that license. But I do like the fact that a testing license is potential and something I would probably want to bring back to the council for consideration.
Madam Chair, the reason why I point out the time frame and the tough process that they have to go through is for tax reasons, right? The city has already set up a tax framework. And if the business is not operating, they're not paying those operational fees or those taxes. And so if we allow business activities that will ultimately be held up by an outside city department for months, I've even seen years, you won't be generating that revenue unless we create a policy around that. So we could say, you know, upon issuance of X, the fees start. But the problem with that is you will get a lot of pushback from operators on that, saying, well, we're not operating, so why would we have to pay operational fees? Mm-hmm. So that is the only reason I bring that up, because I think it's important for the city to evaluate if this is a tax revenue program, then how soon do we want to get that tax revenue coming in to fund those programs that you're ultimately looking to fund?
I'll go ahead and let Robert go ahead, and then I'll make a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. You know, I spoke to you, Ebony, before this meeting, and you know, I just want to reiterate the process that the city has selected to pursue is a very open and transparent and cautious approach, because you know, this is first time that the city is implementing a cannabis programs, and that's I think you said that this is kind of unusual that even the consultant has to go through this process for the contract when you've been chosen as after RFP process. But we do want to, it's very important from the very beginning for the city to be open and transparent. And that's the reason why we're going through this process. Having said that, I wanted to ask you, when you said that a lounge, if council did decide to go forward with a lounge as well, you said it's a local jurisdiction. Is it just a conditional use permit and there's no state license associated with the lounge? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so two things. First, there is no state license for lounge, correct? Now, whether or not we make it a CUP or some other type of license types within your city framework, that would be something we would have to evaluate while we're building this ordinance. And just to your point, Robert, about transparency, yes, I do think that this is, a different step than normal. But in terms of transparency, we too want everything to be transparent and above board because, as I mentioned in our original presentation, being transparent through cannabis is the best way to do a cannabis program. So we very much appreciate having this committee and having the level of transparency that the city of Hawthorne is taking with this. In terms of our goals for economic development, that is what I'm always going to give you all of the options, and hey, this is what we've seen. And so if we want to go very slow through this process, we're totally okay with that. I just want you to know that. But we just want you to know the good and the bad and the ugly of everything that comes with those decisions.
Yeah.
Let me just ask you one quick follow-up question, Ebony, is that if the city council voted to, let's say, to have you guys just do everything as quick as possible and for all different licenses, what do you think the time process will be?
18 months.
18 months. Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be approximately 18 months. I have, every time I've seen it done in short periods of time, there are a lot of errors, mistakes, redos, re-overs. So I think this process isn't a 4-month process. It really is, I would say 18 months or more in terms of building a program, starting an ordinance, just getting an ordinance approved. We all know it takes quite a bit of time to go through that. And I wouldn't rush it any sooner than that.
Yeah.
But I also think that this is a program that can be built upon. So I think we could start like this. I think the city of Long Beach, and Tony can speak a lot to that process, but the city of Long Beach kind of started with one, building blocks. We're going to start with looking at these licenses and we're going to add on. And I think some cities do it that way as well. So really, it just depends on what the city's goals are. And we can build a program around those goals. And I think that that's probably the best way. There's no one size fits all for cannabis for a city. It very much is a custom program.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Vaughn.
Yeah, Ebony, when you speak on the 18 months, does it shorten if we go with 1 or 2 licenses, or that footprint for 18 months that is encompassing all 4 permit applications, or 18 months for each item per se?
So I think it's 18 months total. So assuming that you're doing all the licenses, building out the entire program, screening applicants, getting applicants to provide all the bid, a conditional use permit or a development agreement. Those negotiating those take time. But if you did retail, let's say retail or distribution, those have very minimal impacts. Those, I believe, you can move through a lot quicker because the build out doesn't take as long either. So we're looking at putting a retail activity in an existing retail infrastructure. That's going to get you to the finish line a lot quicker than a cultivation site or heavy manufacturing, where you're looking at a lot of mechanical and technical things.
So I guess my follow-up question of that is, when we say 18 months, that's the rollout for all 4 permits, or would we be able to implement retail in 6 to 7 months and then another 4 months distribution and so forth? Or would the ordinance have all items included, which would take 18 months?
Yes. So in my model, the ordinance is one part of that 18-month process. So it's not rolling out how long it takes the operators to get going or for us to issue a license. It's for us to do the work to get there. So whether we do 1 license type or 4, the ordinance still takes 2 months to write. So we could do it either way in terms of that. Now, when we're talking about how soon it is for operators to get going and actually generating revenue, of course, retail is going to be a lot faster than cultivation.
Vice Chair, did you have a question?
Yeah, she actually just answered it
Okay.
on her last comment. So thank you.
Ebony, say that one more time, please, in your ending.
So when I'm talking about the 18-month, it's the building out and implementing the entire process. So the ordinance itself is going to take X amount of months, whether we have 3 uses or we have 1 use. The implementation of those, screening those applicants, going through that process, varies, a little based on those, but ultimately the time to get started, that how soon the city is going to be receiving revenue changes quite a bit from a new build, or even if we're doing infill on a cultivation or manufacturing rather than retail or distribution that doesn't require as much of a build out. So
Correct.
Those are the two timeframes you're looking at.
Correct. And
Ebony, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So Ebony, to kind of dumb it down for me, if we were doing all the licenses or just one or two, the revenue coming into the city wouldn't be any quicker doing that building block style as opposed to doing them all at once. Am I right? Because it's going to be the same cycle time regardless if it's one or multiple, correct?
In terms of building the ordinance and the infrastructure for this program, yes. But in terms of the tax revenue, so we're talking about, I think we're talking about two different revenues. So when we're talking about building, let's say the application process and the application fees, our fee may be, let's say $5, and the city may charge $10 for their services. So that revenue right there will be the same. When we talk about the tax revenue, once they're operating, that is going to change drastically between your cultivators and your retailers, because the retailers will be able to get started a lot faster than your cultivators. So those are the two timelines I think we're discussing. But in terms of what I think you all are asking is, if we pick one license type or we pick all four, is it going to take us the same amount of time to get through this process? And that answer is yes. It is going to take the same amount of time for us to get through all the paperwork of it all, whether we have one license or all five.
And that's it's important to, emphasize the merit base. Because when you emphasize merit base, they already know what it entails. They could start their retail and be in the process of applications for the other licensing choices that have been made by the city of Hawthorne in their ordinance, correct?
Right. And I think that it's important to say, when we're going through the screening of this and we're doing those merit reviews, if you will, if an operator says they want to do retail and some other use, that screening process is the same. Those are all the same. I don't think we would need to create building blocks for that.
Right.
That process would be the same no matter what. But I do think it's important when we're talking about merit-based to be a little cautious with that, because when we're talking about merit, we're usually looking at operators that are already existing and up and running. And I recall the city initially saying that they also wanted to look at small business owners and operators that were local within the city, and they may not have the same experience, which is why we talked about social equity programming and things of that nature. Because by making it simply merit-based and asking questions about experience, you then create an inequity for those trying to get into the business. So it's something that we should think about, and how to address that. I think it's important to think about when we start designing the program and the program requirements.
Yeah, I think for the most part, city council's, very forward thinking when it comes to equity. I think it shows in the selection of you and your consulting firm, right?
I think so, yeah.
That's very important to me. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, so to kind of, did you have, Ebony, another presentation that you wanted to show us first, or?
Not necessarily. I think it's important that everyone has a chance to look over the RFP, but I think, Mr. Palmer did a great job bringing out the licensing fees. There are a couple of things I just wanted to add to that. Those program fees that Mr. Palmer put on the screen were from our proposal for retail. So that was dialed back quite a bit. Our original proposal that included everything had those same fees, but again, we're looking at if we're reviewing one application or if we're doing separate applications. So there might be some variance there. I just want to, be completely transparent with that, is that each would be per application. So if we're doing, different uses per application and we're reviewing them separately, then that's going to be, those each fees are going to be per application. Also, those fees are the cost recovery fees. And so all of the program for cannabis, the way that we have designed it, is 100% cost recovery, which means all of the fees, including the $6,000 retainer fee, is actually billable to the applicants. And so that's how we designed our recovery model. So I think it's important to talk about that a little bit, because I want everyone to understand that all of those fees are built out. They are built to the city and they're reimbursed by the applicant. Or we collect the fees from the applicant first, before the work is done. But however it is done, our contract is with the city. So we aren't actually billing the applicants. We are billing the city, and the city is billing the applicants. But it is full cost recovery. So at the end of this, the city's overall spend for the program would mostly be your internal fees that you don't pass on. You do have the option of passing those on and building those in as well. We only presented what our fee to the city would be, but you all can do a cost recovery of your own costs, and we have done that before as well.
So I don't understand, if you're some of the rates are per hour, how can that be completely borne out by the applicant fee?
So there's two ways of doing that. The initial screening, you'll notice that we kind of broke it down in phases, and for that reason, what we do is the application fee covers all of the costs that we anticipate for that review process. Once you have done your initial selection of the operators who are going to move on to, let's say we have a phase 2 or round 2, you find a group of applicants that you want to screen further, then those would be the applicants, and we have another fee based on that. So we can build the model. Again, this was based off of kind of an open RFP for all of the different things that you can do. But as we narrow down the scope, we can also narrow down that application fee, and we can also narrow down those prices. But ultimately, those hourly fees, once we have the applicants, a lot of the fees are activities that go with processing or permit processing. So we've already selected them. You're already in this process, and so we have a contract or some other mechanism, depending on how your city already does kind of, a lot of times we already have a model for cost recovery, whatever that is, a reimbursement agreement or whatever it is your city uses, that would be that same fee structure. And we can work with your finance department to build that out. And so typically what we do is we charge a fee. For example, if we move down the road of development agreement, we would charge a flat fee for a development agreement as a deposit. So it would be $10,000 or whatever it is. And the city staff would bill their time against it. We would bill our time against it. And that way we have some fee recovery system in place when we move through these activities that will be more individual. Because as you can imagine, I think Madam Chair said it best, when you're dealing with people who already are operating, they already know the process. So they're going to move through this process a lot quicker than, let's say, a new operator who is just coming to the business, and they're going to need a lot more support. So I think we have the cost recovery model is the best way to do that, so that you will not incur any additional fees, for those applicants that do need a little more support. They'll be paying per hour.
Okay. But the bottom line is the city will not have eventually any out-of-pocket costs for this process, even if, let's say, we had a consultant take care of everything for the city.
Correct. That would be that is exactly how it would work. It'd be a full cost recovery system.
Okay. Thank you.
Real quick. Stephanie, I'm sorry. Can you log off and phone only, please? Thank you. Ebony, going back to your question with regards to the 18 months. I know that there's been a lot of discussion among residents and constituents here in our city. It was passed back in November. They were hoping for something, immediate, fast. And I know the city council took an aggressive move here at the beginning of the year to assure that a cannabis program is delivered. And that's what we're currently doing today, but it takes time. It takes time to assure that we have policy that is drafted and is forming to the city of Hawthorne, its population and its diversity, correct? And I also want to just stress that as much as folks think that this is going to be done, you know, by the end of this year, I doubt that. And so I want folks to be patient. I want folks to understand that are viewing and participating and taking part. Thank you very much for that. To know that we are working and we are working to assure a good delivery in a cannabis program. Can you talk a little bit? On there's a separation between the retail factor of it and the other licensing components. And I know you said that as direction is given with regards to how the processes are made for applications and ultimately the selections from those applicants on which licensing they're looking to do. There's some that can be a little bit quicker than others. And then there's some that are going to be ultimately working towards others once they're established in a sense. Is that correct? Once I would assume they would be established, not necessarily trying to do all 5 or all 4 in a timeline that's not going to be anytime soon, obviously.
Right. I think if you're speaking to like a integrated license where they have multiple activities in the same building, I think they can definitely start on one. I think that's the question is, if I got retail and manufacturing, can I start on retail before I get to manufacturing? And I definitely think that there's a process to do that. And depending on what your existing city codes allow, I think that's what we're going to be evaluating, right? We're going to see what in cannabis can we fit in your existing, policy infrastructure and what we have to add or supplement or revise. So it's difficult to say what that time frame will be or, what it will look, what would it look like because we don't have the ordinance yet. But we definitely can build in a process where, if you're ready to go for retail, you can get going with retail. I don't think that there's anything that would hold a retailer up from getting started before a cultivator, let's say.
Okay. And I also want to touch bases, and this is going to probably be towards our city manager, our planning department, because it speaks to internal operations and it speaks to internal employee knowledge, right? And that's going to be important, Mr. McLean, with regards to the planning component, and the same to you, Mr. Palmer, because building and safety, public works, all of this is going to be important. And we've already had challenges on other fronts with regards to the coronavirus, with regards to homes trying to be built here in our city, constructions and things being held up. We're still not in full operation here in our city, just so that everyone online and those watching know that we're working towards that. However, we are working by appointments only. So I just want to speak, have the planning department, Mr. Craig, speak a little bit on some of the things that ultimately your department would be overseeing and assisting with. And then ultimately, I think, Ebony, in regards to the line items that we were discussing earlier with regards to inspections and things like this, I would have to refer back to our departments who are engineers and who are inspectors and who've been doing this for years, and ultimately have, the city be key in those inspections and assurances, obviously before those operations go live, right? But go ahead, Mr. McLean. I want you to just speak a little bit on the department and how we're going to be ultimately integrating all of this work towards a good cannabis program.
Yes, thank you. We're the planning department primarily responsible for all of the short-term and long-range planning of the city. We manage the zoning code, and needs a little bit of fixing here and there, but we're very responsive to zone code amendments, and we know that we're going to need some, quite a few probably, to accommodate this in terms of land use. And we'll be working very closely with you to facilitate those. We know the code pretty well, the staff that's here. All of us have worked for the city for probably more than a decade now. And so we'll be a very good resource to you for finding all of the little pitfalls that are in the code. So that part will be very useful, but we are a very small staff also. Luckily, at this moment, there's not much holding us back from digging right in. It will be a little bit more challenging on the building side. They're a lot more swamped than planning is at the moment. So, but the initial work that you'll need will be on the planning side, and we're here to help.
Great.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's great. We really like the model of working, hand to hand in tandem with the existing planning department, because like you said, you are the most familiar with the city. You're the most familiar with the uses and the sites. But I just want to clarify, when we're talking about building inspections, what we're looking for on those inspections is this building suitable for this use? So it's not your typical building inspector inspection where they're looking for building code violations necessarily. It's more so, do I have 200 square feet trying to do a cultivation site? Or is this building, we've never had any uses. We don't have any history of uses on this. And so now we're looking at CEQA. Is this a change of use? What are our impacts here? So we're looking at it from a different perspective than our typical building code. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these building inspections. When we're looking at site visits, we're looking at compatibility. Where is the nearest school? Can we see it? Are they walking along this path? Do we have small children walking in front of a dispensary? Those are the things we're looking at on those sites.
Then we're back to planning again.
Yeah, we're back to planning functions,
Back
right?
to planning. And then in that discussion, we go back to how much is it done by population? When we talk about the licensing, how many licenses, for these selected licenses that the council chose, how much? So are we going by population? We know that our city is a 6.5 mile radius city. It's not that big. And then when we talk about zoning, where and how much feet in between, say, how many yards, how many feet are we away from, churches, from schools, what would that zoning selection be? And ultimately, these are things that are going to have to be brought to the council. But I think this is very important that we start engaging in these conversations as a committee. And then we're going to have to go into the community and get community feedback, which is very important. And that's the community engagement component, which is going to be important for all of us. And those comments that are ultimately going to be coming. So all of this is very engaging. It's all very important. Is there anything left that we might have left out? Anyone here on this? How do we get to how much? How do we get to the population? How do we get to the number of licensing? Ebony, where do we go from here?
I think there's two things that I think we would need to start with at this first committee meeting. And that one is narrowing down the uses, which I think we've done quite a bit of that today. We added testing on. We need to decide whether or not manufacturing is, if we're going to allow manufacturing and let it be a business decision as to whether or not they move through that type 7 or type 6 process. But ultimately creating the framework for the scope of activities the city is going to allow. And then I also think we would need to figure out maybe the timeline for how we want to move forward, because we're talking about an ordinance that doesn't exist yet, and it's important for us to get community feedback before we do this ordinance. So I think the next part is okay, what's our timeline? What are the key activities that we want to really hone in on and figure out what we need to do next? Because I would say the next thing that we would need to do after we have those license types, before we figure out how much they're going to cost or how much it's going to be or how many we're going to have, is figuring out what the community input is. And so I think the next step is, what does community outreach look like? What does community engagement look like? Before we can even dial down how many, we should probably ask the community what they feel that they need.
Yep. And you know, our next meeting of this committee is not until they're held on the second and fourth Thursday of each month, so that everybody has this on your calendar. The next one would be January 13th and January 27th. And I think it's important, you know, since this is our first meeting and everyone's learning together here, that I'm sure there will be more comments. There will be folks calling in to express their suggestions, their recommendations, and we welcome that. Today, it's obviously a discussion on many fronts. And I do know that typically applications, if I'm hearing correct, run anywhere between $5,000 to $8,000, and they could run, and those are probably initial applications. Initial applications that I know from what I'm hearing, they could go as far as, and then of course there's supplement application fees, right? $5,000, if not more, and then ultimately could go up as high as 20,000.
Or higher. I've definitely seen 30, I've seen 50, I've seen higher than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I hear that, it's amazing to me. But at the same time, these are businesses that have been doing this for a period of time. These are businesses that can afford it. So how do we address those that can't and ultimately want to have an opportunity as well? So all of that is important.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's when we get into, when we start talking about those new business owners and opportunities for those who haven't had millions of dollars of startup investment. What does that process look like for them? And you know, talking about social equity is really important in cannabis right now, and talking about equity in policy is really a hot topic even in the planning community. So I think it's important for us to talk about what that licensing process looks like for them. And I think Tony is an excellent candidate here to speak on what social equity programs can look like. Tony, if you want to talk just a tiny little bit about LA and Long Beach, you have fairly good models. And what options we have available for licensing.
Thank you, Ebony, and thank you, Madam Chairperson. Just to go back to some of the statements you were stating about costs. We're looking on average between 9,000 and 13,000. So for example, the city of Pasadena was a little over 13,000. LA is a little over 9, West Hollywood a little over 9. So we are looking at those costs. Going to the point that Ebony made regarding social equity, the state has done a great job with offering grants. I would suggest that the city of Hawthorne do something very similar. It is very difficult for people that do not have access to wealth, that do not have generational wealth, to come up with 9,000 and 13,000 non-refundable dollars in order to apply for a cannabis application. And so I would like us to build some type of mechanism, if possible, that we do some type of fee waiver or grant in order to give those small businesses, especially those social equity businesses, an opportunity to apply. And so we're seeing similar programs in the city of LA. I think the great thing that you all are doing is getting the foundation built before. That didn't happen in the city of LA. It was a piecemeal approach, and it really, if we're talking about transparency, brought a lot of animosity from operators as well as social equity individuals. And so I think when we're doing the planning of this, let's keep that in mind and try to build into the ordinance some type of mechanism that offers some type of economic relief for people who want to apply for the program.
Yes, thank you for that. And, you know, just full disclosure, I work for the city of Los Angeles. for city council myself, and I've been part of that for the last 15 years. So I do understand the city of Los Angeles and those processes that went on for a period of time, I think, until they finally got it right. However, there's still a lot of, bad actors. There's still a lot of folks that think that they could just, do what they want. Rest assured, folks out there that are watching, it's not going to happen here in the city of Hawthorne. It's not business as usual here. And we have ears and eyes on everyone. It's not a big city, unlike LA, 10 million people, right? Here, you do something and police is there immediately. So thank you so much for that, Officer Craig. And I just want you all to know that I look forward to this, this program. And you're absolutely right. We have been very instrumental right now helping businesses with restoring their business back to operation levels with regards to the Business Recovery Act that the federal government has provided businesses an opportunity to apply here with our city to receive relief dollars. And so we're very instrumental in that. And we probably will continue for some time because this thing isn't going away anytime soon. I said anywhere between 2 to 5 years before we'll probably see any relief from, variant A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and whatever's coming down the line. But I like that. And that's something that this committee and the council could ultimately entertain. Yes, Mr. Palmer, go ahead.
Something for the committee to consider, as a planner, we do have a lot of experience working with consultants, building programs, downtown specific plan. We have a lot of experience that, but if we're going to go forward and we're going to have staff, no matter what department it is, work with the consultant, can it be some sort of effort to have that stuff be a priority? Because the cannabis application is, like it says, not business as usual. So if someone comes in for the cannabis application and someone in staff is tasked to help, but then we have a bunch of other things that we're doing on our normal, is going to be kicked to the back burner. If we're talking about 18 months, that can kick out the total build out. So I just think we need all hands on deck. If any staff is going to participate, it has to be kind of known in the city. It has to kind of be like a statement, and you're working on a project. So when something like that comes, it's a top priority. That's just something to consider.
Yes, thank you for that. And that's also going to play hand in hand with our city manager and HR when it comes to screening and vetting out applicants for a number of jobs here in our city. We need good applicants that are very well versed. And today's language obviously is cannabis. So if that's something that we're going to be ultimately, looking at with regards to filling some of our department positions that currently are in need, those are some things to look at too. I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next item because we've been talking on this for a length of time, but that's important. I don't want to take away from everything that we're having here in discussion. Everything's important, and I'm not trying to rush. I truly am not. I'm dedicated this time and this meeting and this committee, again, to work aggressively to provide a good cannabis program. Item number 6 is a discussion regarding the scope of work that we ultimately want to provide to consultants, and that's in between the members here for discussion. Anyone want to provide a comment with regards to scope of work?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
What I'm kind of a little bit confused about is there are certain areas. For instance, I had a discussion with the director of the building and safety here, and he's explained that he would have no issue inspecting, for instance, a manufacturing site or cultivation site. He understands what's involved with that, but in terms of inspection of the building itself, he said there shouldn't be any issue with the department here handling that portion. But and so let's, for instance, take an example of the background check, which your program, I think it's about $500 per background check. That's something that through the police department we could also do as well. But if the applicants are paying for all of this, and let's say city does a portion of it, how would that work?
So I think that goes back to how we set up the cost recovery program. So anything that the city can handle, for example, background checks. I just want to clarify again about the building inspections. They're not the same. So a building inspection that a building official is talking about is during the construction process. What we're looking at are more land use related issues or compatibility issues or things with specific to cannabis. So I just want to make sure that that's different, because when by the time it gets to the building department, they're already, starting to build, and we're talking about before then. When we're talking about fees and how they are carried to the applicant, if the city, for example, I know a lot of cities already do background checks in-house and they have a fee for that, it can just be paid directly to the city. We wouldn't need to be involved in that if the city is handling it. And that goes for any case. For example, if there is a conditional use permit and there's already a conditional use permit fee, that would be something that they could pay directly to the city. So those things we can iron out as we figure out what, the scope and what we're going to handle versus what the city is going to handle. But we don't have a problem with turning over anything that the city can handle over to those city departments, and they can bill as they normally would.
Thank you.
Can I just make mention too, because you made a remark earlier, Ebony, that you spoke on whether or not a building is suitable.
Right.
Suitable for the program. And I think that falls back again to the planning aspect of it all. And it's going to refer back to the city council aspect of it all, because at the end of the day, we still have to decide again on the zoning preference in the city, those amendments that ultimately would have to take place, where, again, how much, what's the footage that's going to be implemented into the zoning component of the language.
Development standards, parking. Yes. Is this building have enough parking for this use? Yes. Also, any beautification standards you would like to add into the program. If you have older buildings that need to come to the new standards, those are the kind of things that we're looking at. Yeah. More so than the building, how high is the toilet? So I just want to make sure that it's clear.
Yeah, no, and I think for the most part, Mr. Kim provided, good examples, right, of how much work that the city department heads would ultimately take up. And that's why I wanted the planning department to speak on the planning's work in this program. And so I think we've already made that clear. Mr. Kim, with regards to building and safety, and department head Peter Wang would ultimately, still take up that. Planning department, Mr. Gregg would bring that item to the council to address the zoning and footage and everything else that is planning driven. And I think this is something that's coming along. But that's why we're having this meeting, so we could discuss those. Other scope of work, you would be in communications and discussions with who, Ebony, in our city with regards to collaboration between you and our city?
The main departments, I think, would be code enforcement, because when we start licensing, we likely will come across some unlicensed facilities. So code enforcement, and maybe the police department, depending on how active they, or how they work together. Obviously, planning will be probably 80 to 90% of it, and the city manager's office and the city attorney's office are usually the main departments involved. The building department definitely gets involved post entitlement process. Once we're looking at construction and build out, a lot of operators prefer to work both process simultaneously to save time. So that is something that we can evaluate how to do that. and the waivers for those liabilities of running those two things concurrently. But it does save operators time, and it allows the city to hit those revenue marks sooner, because we will have the building department evaluating plans and those kind of things going through plan check while we're going through the entitlement or parts of the entitlement process. Obviously, some of it we won't be able to overlap, but once the selection process is over and they're kind of meeting some of these operational standards that we like to go through to make sure that the facility is operated in compliance with both the city requirements and the state, it can also go through plan check at the same time. That would be when the building department would really be helpful. And I believe your building department handles a lot of stuff in-house, but they might have an outside firm that they also use for engineering. And so that's when that side of the development process would be engaged.
And just to keep in mind, we still have a planning commission.
Right.
We still have a planning commission, and there's still, applicants that, are asking for either waivers or asking for a conditional use permit, or
Right.
go through those process that ultimately the planning commission has the discretion of approvals or not.
Absolutely. We would still go through the planning commission, design review committee, if you have it. Any of your other normal planning processes would still be implemented, including CEQA. And so that's another important part of this building evaluation, is we do have to make some type of CEQA determination. That's important. So those are the things that it's, in that regard, it's business as usual in the city, because
Yes.
the planning process will be the planning process.
Right.
And we would all go through that same process. Even with any amendments to the zoning code, there is a process for that. So anything that your general plan didn't anticipate that we cannot make, find an excess to, those things are very important for us to evaluate, which is why I say 18 months is the most likely and realistic timeline, because from a planning perspective, there is a lot of work that goes into amending any kind of code.
So I think we need to do first things first, right? I think the council has to work on those other things that we just discussed, obviously, right? The zoning.
The zone test. Well, I think if I may, Madam Chair, I think the first thing we want to ask the city council to do is to add testing into the allowed uses. And then the next thing we are going to ask them to do is, for our contract, at least, we need to kind of figure out the overall scope, maybe not fine tune every little detail, but the overall scope of what we're going to be handling, and approve that. So then the next marching order to this committee and to us will be, let's figure out where we're going in terms of community outreach and where we're going in terms of this ordinance, because the ordinance is going to be important for us to, kind of reverse engineer all of the numbers that you're looking for, Madam Chair. How many retail, how many cultivation?
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. McLean.
Actually, Ebony, you just said what I was going to say. That was the sequence I was going to recommend. When it comes to the part where we're writing the ordinance, that's the policy part, and that's where there's going to be a lot of interaction between planning and your company, and a lot of interaction with the planning commission, and then with the city council, and that's where everything comes together. Once that's all done and it comes out in the form of various code amendments and so forth, then planning takes on a much more independent role in where it comes to conditional use permits for applicants, and where it comes to site visits and inspections and so forth.
Right.
But in that initial part, we're in unknown territory for us. We'll need a lot of consultation and so forth on best practices and so forth. And I think everybody on the committee needs your help there to find the best policies. And
Sure.
Yeah, but that you stated what I wanted to say, so thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Kim, go ahead.
Thank you. Ebony, what do you think the time frame will be? So after we reach ordinance, about how much longer after that where we start accepting applications for licenses?
Well, we can do that certainly within several weeks, depending on the direction from the council, especially around the social equity component, because I think it's important for us to figure out, are we going to do a fee waiver system? Are we going to accept applications from social equity applicants first? What is that going to look like? But ultimately, once we have the framework together, which would be established by the ordinance, we can then set the timeline for applications and build that application process. So what I like to do is, as we build this ordinance, we are also building the requirements for the application, right? Because we're asking the applicants to demonstrate how they're going to meet the requirements of said ordinance. So we are, by building the ordinance, we're also building out what the application is going to look like. So getting there won't take us an incredible amount of time, but it's just a matter of how you want to accept applications in that sequencing. But we could do it weeks from approval, final approval, because obviously ordinances take a few approvals, but from final approval, we can start rolling out as soon as weeks, depending on how you're going to do your rollout with the social equity component.
I asked that because the next phase of the committee is we're going to have a licensing committee that would actually recommend issuance of licenses. So I don't want to cause any delay, because that requires a resolution with city council for the members and what things of that nature, informing it. So in terms of the time frame for that, so I take it that when we're ready to submit ordinances for council consideration, that's when we can also do a resolution to form a licensing committee.
Right, that would be my recommendation too, is do that together, both the ordinance options and the committee resolution.
Mr. Norris?
I have a question for Mr. Kim. What do we need to accomplish today before the meeting's over to expedite, move this this goal of ours forward?
Oh, that's me.
Yes.
Okay,
What
so
do we need? Yeah, did you hear my question?
yes,
Okay.
so the last on the agenda, it would be to whether the committee will recommend the contract for the ESMA planning and as a consultant agreement. And then the next item after that would be to members to discuss the next topic and what to be placed on the agenda for the next meeting.
And if I may, Madam Chair, one of the things that we wouldn't be able to get to today is that number of applicants that were applications, but we have somewhat narrowed down the types of uses. So I think that is a recommendation back to the city council, is to add testing back in as a potential license type. And also maybe the way that we can frame the contract is, and Robert, this is probably more a question for you, but is there an opportunity for us to maybe have like an NTE and then dial back into that? Because I think it is going to reflect the ultimate price will reflect the number of applicants that we have.
We're gonna have to, in terms of actually drafting an agreement and coming up with the clauses that we're all agreeable to, that we will present to city council, is something that Tony and I will probably have to work on it together.
Okay.
So as we go through that phase, we can further discuss and we can modify it and whatnot until we come up with something that we can recommend to city council.
Perfect. So today we would just be looking to recommend moving forward with the additional use and moving forward with the contract, and we'll dial in. Okay, perfect. That's great. Thank you.
But I just want to make sure committee members address the chair, first of all, with any items, correct, that are next on the agenda. Second, there's a process that we're going through right now. And those process, again, item number 6 is the scope of work. And if I'm hearing correctly, we don't need background check. We don't need planning, site reviews, inspections, because that's going to be made internally. That's what I'm hearing.
Planning definitely needs help.
Okay, but again,
Well, Yes, we may be able to do that, but that's provided that we have a very strong ordinance that explains what we're looking for.
Okay, so I want to make sure that there's notes, because our city clerk is taking notes, right? And we need to make a decision on the scope of work, and that's the focus here. So from what I'm hearing is there's things that we are not going to need from them.
Madam,
But I'm also hearing that there's still going to be consulting that's going to be needed to direct you, right? And to tell you next steps. Is that correct?
Yes, I would recommend that we include it to a certain extent, such as maybe for a limited time as instructional with regard to site selection and site inspections.
Because that's still an application process for planning and plan check, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it still has to go to the planning commission.
Well, that part we're used to doing, but
Right. CEQA reviews, CEQA hearings, all of that is still
Yeah.
processes that we
Yes.
handle internally.
but all of this is also new to us, just in some respects. So maybe to keep them on for the first, X number of applications or for a certain period of time, and then to wean off of them might be a good option.
Okay, so language that would ultimately say that.
Yeah, we could work on that.
Okay, you'll work on that.
Is that
And
something that would work with you?
Ebony, go ahead.
my recommendation is on page 12 of our proposal, we have kind of a list of project services. And so maybe we can go through those. They're kind of more umbrella things, because I think we're getting down into the details of very minute tasks instead of, and those are usually the hourly ones. So if you don't need that, we wouldn't have to bill it. But there are some things that I think are kind of overarching. So if you don't mind, Madam Chair, I think it would be great if we went through that list, and then the staff can say, okay, we definitely don't need that, or we certainly need help with these tasks.
Okay, so committee members, I'm going to read these off real quick. Please take note. There's an ordinance of resolution preparation. There's a permit fee evaluation. There's a development agreement review and oversight. There's a discretionary permit application development review and issuance. A zoning verification. Permit application development. Permit license application review and screening. Community outreach. A CEQA review and a document preparation. A staff report development. General project management services. Preliminary building evaluations. And building plan check, early plan check upon request. Now, the things that I saw right off the bat here are some of the things that we've already made mention in this meeting with regards to all planning, it seems like. But go ahead, Mr. McLean.
I just wanted to point out it continues on the next page.
Yes, a compliance and enforcement report, real estate availability survey. I never heard that, but a social equity program development, a social equity operational assistance, and then legislative updates.
Madam Chair, if I might, there's actually one correction. Number of letter N was compliance and enforcement support. So
what number is that?
Letter N on page 13, compliance and enforcement support, not necessarily report. And that would be working with the internal city staff, for example, code enforcement violations. A lot of times code enforcement officers would like to know, well, what activities are they allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? They're not as familiar. And so that would be that compliance support.
Compliance enforcement support. So tell me real quick. Oh, Mr. McLean, go ahead before I ask.
Yeah, like we just did with letter N. Can I suggest that we go through these one by one, and some of them may require a little bit of explanation to know precisely what they had intended?
Yeah, I have a question with regards to O.
Oh, it's real estate availability survey. That one is surveying the available real estate you have for any of the operators, because it's important to see what buildings you have available before we create zoning ordinances or overlays. Where do you have buildings even available for these types of uses? A lot of times we see, for example, in cities that say you have to have a specific location. Well, does your city have locations available right now for open real estate? Are you going to require for the initial application a location? And if so, what real estate do you have available in your city to accommodate those requests?
You would make those recommendations to the council, or you would make those recommendations to planning?
We would make those recommendations initially to planning, this committee, and then ultimately city council if needed. That's something that we do kind of a preliminary evaluation, like some of the other building evaluations. It's certainly not necessary, but we put it in there because, again, this was an open scope. So we would work with our real estate team to kind of pull some of those open or available options for buildings for the various uses that you have. So that's optional.
This wouldn't come until the zoning and that has all been done.
Actually, we could do it before or after. So we could survey the entire city and say, for example, a lot of this is information and data building, but we could say, hey, the city has 12,000 commercial sites, and of those, 7 are available, and they are in these regions of the city. That's going to help developing zoning or overlays. Those are the types of things that you're going to be looking at. Or, for example, how many industrial buildings do we even have in the city? Of those, how many of them have parking lots? I mean, some of the data that cities like to have before they make these zoning changes or any type of special districts or overlays.
Okay, Mr. McLean.
I recommend that we keep this service. It would be very helpful for us in the early stages of writing the ordinance to know, for example, what zones would be most appropriate, would be most advantageous for us to include, and where we could exclude. And it would help you as the policymakers of this committee as well, in making recommendations with regard to the policies of where we want to limit or allow the uses.
So going back to item number A, the ordinances and resolution preparation, it would come from the recommendation of the council on the ordinances, correct? And then,
Yes.
And then it would go then to the consultant for.
Yes, but like all ordinances, a draft will be prepared, in this case, through collaboration with planning and the consultant, and then would go to this committee for vetting and revision. And then another, possible multiple vetting and changes. And then that will go to the city council for consideration and possible additional changes. But this committee will be presenting the council with an ordinance that will be drafted by planning and the consultant. And that's how it'll go through. So we won't go to the council and ask for all of the different policies that they want, because there's going to be hundreds of policy decisions that will need to be made. For example, just going back to the question was, are we going to require a location to make an application? That's an important policy decision, but it's just one of hundreds that we'll have to decide on. So that's why this item A, I think, is very important to include, because we can't burden the city council with making every single one of those decisions.
So Mr. Norris and Mr. Kim, from these items and from what staff has already expressed, can you tell me which would be internal? I'm trying to narrow down the scope of work.
For me, I think because of all the different departments involved, for instance, I think Mr. McLean has a very significant input on this. If we can just go through these items one at a time and then have a discussion, as simply as possible, I think that would be very helpful. So, because I don't want to, a lot of this does involve planning.
Okay, so back to Mr. McLean, item A would be internal.
No, I think it would be a collaboration, so it has to be part of the scope.
Okay, so collaboration. B, permit fee evaluation. Collaboration,
Wouldn't involve me.
collaboration, city manager, city.
I think B would be between city manager's office and city attorney's office, so
Oh, okay, internal.
internal, yes.
C, development agreement review and oversight.
That I would think that it would involve the city attorney's office and the planning, and I think we want consultants to be involved with that as well.
Collaboration.
Yes.
D, discretionary permit application development review and issuance.
That'll be a collaboration. So include that in those scope.
Okay. E, zoning verifications.
I'd like to ask the applicant to elaborate on what this is.
So the zoning verifications, typically we do initially, once we have an ordinance that sets what zones cannabis is going to be allowed in, then when we have applications, someone has to review to make sure it's a normal zoning verification. So, you know, every city calls them something different, but basically verifying that the applicant is in the actual zone that's allowing the use that they're applying for. And sometimes we build that into part of a phase 1 application process to make sure that the building that they've selected is in the right zone.
So is that a collaboration, Mr. McLean?
No, that would either be entirely them or entirely us. It may be more efficient as part of the processing for them to do it. It's if we did it, it would be, you know, we wouldn't even bill for it. So it might make sense to just let them do it.
But if we have the ordinance and a resolution preparation and collaboration, you would have language that would speak to the zoning, correct?
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying is this would be part of the application intake. And
Okay,
it kind of depends on who's doing the intake. It should be streamlined as much as possible, so it doesn't make sense to have the consultant be a part of the intake or another department be a part of the intake and then, you know, have to
okay,
come to us. So that can be decided later.
okay, later or scope of work.
At least initially, I think it should be part of the scope.
Okay. F, permit application development.
I believe that should be included in the scope.
I agree, it should be included, and I also think it should be a collaboration because this, to your point, Madam Chair, is where we're going to pull the important parts of the ordinance to create that application. So it's going to be a combination of what the city already has existing, which we would get from our planning department, and then also anything that comes that's specifically for operational standards for cannabis. So I believe it'll be a collaboration.
So F will be collaboration. Permit license application review and screening. Collaboration?
I would say collaboration on that one as well, because a lot of that will be done as part of this committee or our licensing screening committee, both of which I'm sure they'll have questions for us on.
Okay.
Agreed.
Community outreach, I would say that's a collaborative.
Agreed.
Agreed.
And I want to see at least three meetings, collaborations, outreach in the community. I, the CEQA review plus the document preparation.
That should be collaborative.
Okay. J, staff report development.
No, that could be done by staff, but it could also be very, very time consuming and depends on the staffing level that we have, which will be unknown at the time.
Ebony, can I get a better explanation of staff report development? What's meant by that?
Preparing a staff report.
Yeah, at which phase? I mean, because we have staff report for every ordinance and resolutions that goes to the council at least.
Right. And that's what that means. All of it.
Okay.
If you want us to help on any of those staff reports, we're going to need it in our scope of work.
So I think collaboration. would be-
A collaborative, right? Because they
Yes.
might be able to assist in
Yeah.
some things. that we
Yeah,
might not
I
be
think
able
that's good.
Yeah.
Collaborative.
Okay, K, general project management services.
That's
That's what this is about, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's just the general program management. So, answering questions, we're probably putting a lot of information on the website, helping go through the steps. Yeah,
Showing up at this meeting, for example.
It would be scope, but in collaboration, right?
right.
Okay, so I'll put collaboration.
Okay.
But that's, but it's also, part of the scope. The preliminary building evaluations.
So this is where I said collaboration, but waning over time, once we get the hang of it.
Okay, so assisting and then ultimately
Yeah.
full throttle to planning.
Eventually, yeah.
Okay,
Perfect. This is the one, building plan check is the one I think we can cross off the list. I
Okay.
think you can handle that internally.
so M is striked out. N, compliance and enforcement support.
That has to be collaborative.
Okay, collaborative. Q, the real estate availability survey, we said part of scope, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
P, the social equity program development, I would say scope,
Yes.
but I would also want council's input.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to say directly collaborative. I would say scope, but with council input. Is that fair enough? Does that
Well,
sound?
Yeah, if I may, that's certainly going to be a policy call.
So I'll say collaborative.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it is. R, social equity operational assistance.
So that one's a big one. Social equity applicants, as we've discussed, a lot of them are new operators or limited operators. They've had limited experience going through these processes, especially with land use entitlements and CEQA, and even operational things. And so what we want to do to have a strong equity program is to provide experts to help support them through this process. And that requires us as consultants to meet with them frequently, help them better understand, like you said, to your point, Madam Chair, about, these bigger operators, they know the process, but smaller operators don't. And so we're going to have to spend some time with them, helping them through this process. And I think it's really critical for them to be successful. And also we would like to bring in some experts to support their operational requirements as well. For existence, a lot of operators don't have a lot of access to various services or, all types of services, from insurance, architects, engineering, all of these things. So we would be able to help support them in that endeavor, including financial. We're going to ask for, let's say, if you said, hey, we want a performa. Well, a lot of operators don't even know what that is, let alone be able to provide one, or they don't have an existing business. So how do they meet that requirement without understanding what that is? That's when we have a financial expert come in and help them pull their records together to create that for their application, and other types of application support, and also pre-operational support.
Okay, so that's part of the scope of the work. The operational assistance. And then obviously when the council decides on how much waiver, how much assistance, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Then we'll decide what those resources are. But I think it's important that we have resources for social equity applicants.
Yes. And then finally, the legislative updates. And I think that's a collaborative, because being in the cannabis business as you all are, you have firsthand knowledge of what's new, what has been amended, or what changes have been made. And so obviously that's part of the scope. However, we also have department heads that are responsible to the council with regards to legislative updates, policy, and language that we might have to implement to assure we're on, similar and correct legislation, whether it's the state or local LA County,
Right. Absolutely.
policies. So I think that's part of the scope, and then in collaboration with the city as well.
Yep, absolutely. And that would also include local legislative updates. So
Right, local, which would include county and state.
exactly.
Okay, so moving on, I'm gonna go now to item number 7, which is a motion and I'm reading here, so everything's been made available to this committee, and or not in recommendation of the EJMA planning. So I have number 7, item number 7 on the floor. If there's anyone that would like to speak more on this from the committee.
If I may, Madam Chair,
Yes.
in terms of, at first, when I saw the proposals and whatnot, I was kind of shell shocked at how expensive it was, but I think it's more because I don't have any background in this area. So having heard that almost all of this would be non-cost to the city, as for just looking at the financial cost to the city, I'm satisfied with the amount of information that was gained today. And I would have no reason to say no to EJMA Planning to be the consultant for the city for future work.
Okay, let me just make a comment real quick before we conclude. I understand that there's going to be a licensing committee working group that's going to ultimately be put together. And if it hasn't already, it's going to follow after this committee, right? However, I do also understand that it's going to be the selection of those licenses, ultimately selection of those applicants, I should say, that is being given towards the council. Is that correct? It's the council will be making the recommendations and selection of the applications. So I just want to make sure that we're all, Mr. McLean, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to say that after going through all of these different parts of the scope, and this is a lot of really heavy lifting on the front end where the ordinance is going to have to be lifted, and based on what we've just gone over, I'm reasonably satisfied that this is a very comprehensive project, and I don't think that it's overpriced, and I'm satisfied that since the applicants will be paying for most of this, I'm going to think very favorably toward this.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a motion and put it on the floor. If I could get a second.
Second. That was me, second.
Okay. City Clerk, can you please do a roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. Chairperson Reyes English,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Craig,
You're muted, Mr. Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Committee Member Norris,
Yes.
Committee Member Kim,
Yes.
Committee Member McLean.
Yes.
And again, I wasn't sure if I heard Vice Chair Craig. You there?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. The results are 5-0 with the motion passing unanimously.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Moving on to item number 8, are there any committee members, comments, future comments? Or is there anything for an agenda? I'll start with committee members. Mr. Kim.
So for me, I think the next phase, and if we can have Tony chime in on this, is that in between the next meeting, which will, I think it was January 13th, I think we need to go hash out the clauses for the agreement. So definitely that we would have something more concrete for the committee to review of the consultants agreement. I think we worked out a lot of it because we went through the scope of it already.
Yes.
So that was very helpful. So I think for me, one of the primary agenda item for the next meeting will be the agreement itself with EJMA Planning.
Thank you for that. And Ebony, just really quick, I think it assisted you also with regards to making amendments to that agreement and coming back exactly with what the recommendations of the committee are, so that we could have that agreement signed and press forward, so that we could go ahead and get started with the processes of applications and anything else that needs to be done. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And we already went through a few revisions, so it's just finalizing, and I think we can definitely do that by the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, Mr. Norris.
I want to say congratulations. What I would like to see at the talk about or actually have provided is a timeline with measurables. So I know we mentioned 18 months, but I would like to see each step for each process, and then some type of mechanism where we can measure if all those expectations were met.
Okay, I'm sure they could do that. Mr. McLean.
I have nothing to recommend for the next meeting. I just wanted to clarify, are we agreeing that the council should consider testing as a additional license?
These are items, recommendations from this committee that's going to go back to the city council. And they're going to be agendized so that there could be an open discussion with regards to the recommendations.
Okay.
What about the lounge? Are we gonna also ask council to see if they want that option as well? It's not that we're actually gonna
Yeah,
issue license for that, or but just whether the council prefer that the consultants look into the lounge as well.
I think ultimately at this time, I know definitely the testing aspect of it. I know there was a brief discussion on lounge, but it's not recommended as something to bring to the council. However, if you could just mention that it's a discussion that was posed and go from there. I, for one, in my opinion, and that's just me, I'm not a fan of lounges. You know, I don't need folks hanging out, lying around, and then these owners calling the police saying they can't get them out, right? That's just me. But again, it could come to the council. We're going to bring the recommendations of what this committee is asking for, and we'll include that. And if any more discussions there, it's on the agenda for discussion. So,
Madam Chair, one thing that when we're talking about lounges, and I think Mr. Palmer might have briefly touched on this, we talk about consumption equity as well. We have a lot of policies on the book that prevent certain groups from using cannabis because they live in public housing or they are renters. So having facilities where they can safely consume is the context. I think we should frame it to the council. Having these safe spaces where they're regulated, and that would be a city function to decide what they look like. So all of your concerns could be addressed through the policies and how we shape consumption lounges in the city. But I think that's the framework and the lens that we should look at it from, not necessarily just, you know, kind of like a bar.
yeah. And again, city manager, Mr. Norris, you'll bring those items to the council.
Sure, yes, I will.
Thank you. And then we have Sergeant Craig.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I would just, first of all, want to say congratulations. And then secondary, this is probably further down the line. But if I could maybe see, I don't know if anybody can help us, but what a template of what their background checks look like, so that I could run that by our background investigators, because under the cost recovery, we want to come up with a price that we're going to charge for that. I would assume they're probably less comprehensive than we do for a police recruit, which we dive very deep into. So I don't know if that's something we could look at. Yeah,
we definitely can do that. And I think if the police department can help with that and do at the state level, we do the live scan, you know, fingerprinting, the DOJ review. So I would assume that the city would want something at least that comprehensive and that detailed. And so we can work with you on that. Definitely, Mr. Craig.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
And you know, and I want to piggyback on that, Vice Chair. Is it costly for the city to do it per applicant? I know they're going to pay for it, right? They're going to pay for it.
Well, that's what I kind of want to see what we're looking at from the construct, and then run it by our background investigators, and then come up with because under the cost recovery, I'm assuming the applicant is going to pay for that, correct?
Absolutely. The applicants pay for their background checks. And so
I'm able to get ahead of that, so we know what we're going to do for each applicant and then come up with a price.
Sure, absolutely. And we can work that out and figure out exactly how deep of an investigation you all want to conduct. Okay. But we can certainly help with that, Vice Chair.
Yeah, and I was going to talk a little bit more on that because I did a background search. I'm a court reporter, And I had to do a background search. And it lists like, how deep do you want the search, right? FBI, Department of Justice. There's a number of processes for how much. And seeing the cost here and what I paid for, I had questions about that. Because I ultimately got to select where I get processed and where I get checked, right? And pay for it myself, but okay. Yes, Mr. Norris.
Yes, I have a question actually for you, Madam Chairwoman.
Uh-huh.
Is it too early to discuss retail fees with council regarding what we're anticipating our fees will be for retail?
I think now that we know that we have a consultant before us, I think it would be great for you to talk with Ebony and have a discussion on what that looks like and what we're anticipating, and then ultimately bring that to the council along with the other recommendations for licensing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. McLean, anything else? Mr. Kim? Mr. Palmer, go ahead.
I think maybe a good topic will probably be like a framework of community outreach. We should
Yes.
get an early start on that.
Yes. And Ebony, I think working with Mr. Norris, knowing the groups that we have here in Hawthorne, our homeowner groups, knowing the nonprofit organizations, knowing our school community, knowing our church community, having those and getting in contact already with some of the pastors, some of the churches, some of those groups and organizations leadership, I think is important on a discussion. Again, I think a good outreach is 3, and I say 3 real productive, good hours, whether one is in the afternoon and then those in the late hour to accommodate those that are coming off work that wants to be able to engage as well. I think there's also maybe a component of sorts that could be questions being taken on it online and having those questions answered, and then reporting those out and knowing exactly how many engaging community members in the community we've been able to speak with. I think that's
We can definitely do that, Madam Chair. And another way to reach a bigger audience is we can actually do like a Facebook Live or Instagram Live, incorporate technology so we can get real live questions from those who, or even a Zoom meeting, so that those who have to be remote, they can still participate and ask all of those questions in real time. We can do community surveys. Another way we've done it is outreach by your districts or different services that you have, for instance, at your parks and rec centers. We can hold them there. We definitely want to reach out to your senior community.
Yep.
And all of the religious groups, organizations, we can host there. There's a lot of different ways that we can do this, but we've done community outreach. We have a very strong background doing those types of things. So we're happy to give some recommendations at our next meeting once we've talked to the city manager a little deeper about some of those loose ends that we have in terms of what all we're trying to gather. But we can definitely make some recommendations for outreach next meeting and get started on those.
absolutely. And then Vaughn, also moving forward, I'd like to ultimately see maybe a walking component door to door to businesses and community. Once we have the dates and times and how we're going to be able to engage individuals, Zoom, social media, live chats, participating here online, where comments, communications being done in real time. Okay.
Understood.
Anything more? Mrs. Forge, do you have anything, ma'am?
No, I didn't.
You've been sitting there so quiet. I just want to make sure.
I was going to ask a prior question. When we're talking about legislative updates, would the committee be interested in federal legislative updates? There's a lot of things happening on Capitol Hill, but I just wanted to make sure that the scope was just local, statewide, or you're interested in federal as well.
I don't even think federal is engaging at this time. I know there's one legislator that had the guts and courage to bring that to the floor, to open up the federal government to its potential cannabis program. But I haven't seen that happen. Matter of fact, I haven't even heard our former congresspersons here in our South Bay cities even engage on cannabis and whether or not they want to carry legislation on the floor of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. to address cannabis. So I would like to see more of LA County and the state. And then when we get to that next step, whether or not we get all 40 senators and all, 80 whatever legislators on the floor to agree, that's going to be another, several years, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But thank you for that. I really appreciate it because I think all policy is important policy. And if there are policy with the federal government that you feel is important to us, by all means, please give us that update.
I will, because there's the MORE Act, we have the Safe Banking Act, and we have the Schumer, more expansive. So we're getting a couple of feelers out there with that, but I will update the committee accordingly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know the city of Los Angeles is looking into their own banking. So, they're going to be opening up their own bank, City of LA Bank.
Yep, I work with the city of LA, so I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, I don't know if we're there yet, but we might. We become, we're already popular here in our little city, our little hidden gem that's no longer hidden. And, I can't express enough how excited I am for many endeavors here in our city. And it speaks to the leadership here on our council and leadership in our department heads and leadership through our city manager and city attorney to assure that we're moving the city forward and we're providing prosperity for longevity for years to come. And so again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adjourn this first meeting for today. If there's nothing further for this meeting, I adjourn the meeting now at what I want to make sure I have the right time because my clock has been wrong for the longest in my office. I'm adjourning at 1:17 p.m. Thank you so much for everyone's participation. Mr. Norris, did you have something else further before we go?
Yes, for the record, should we note when the next meeting is going to occur?
Yes, the next meeting, as Maid mentioned, would be the second and fourth Thursday of each month, which is January 13th and January 27th. Same time, 11 a.m., unless there's consensus on this committee that says that we need to change the hour for any given time. But at this time, I don't see that or hear that. This is just our first meeting, but moving forward, that could possibly be something to entertain. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. Thank you so much. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Well,
And everybody have a great holiday.
Yes.
thank you. Bye,
Take good
everyone.
care.
Take
Bye-bye.
Good meeting. Thank you so much.